How's it going, everybody? My name is Ron Sparkman, and I'm the Chief Curiosity Correspondent here at the Space Foundation Discovery Center. And right behind me, you can see, actually, let me switch hands here, a very cool piece of technology that we use here called the Science on a Sphere. And on the Science on a Sphere, we right now have the moon projected on it. And the reason why we have the moon projected on it is the amazing science communicator that we're going to speak with today, the one and only, the space geologist. On Instagram, you can find her there, Raquel Nuno. So Raquel, we're going to talk about some cool things today about the moon. And in particular, one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to you is that something kind of crazy has been going on around the world, and everybody has been hearing about it. There was a ship is restuck in the Suez Canal. And we're going to talk a little bit how the tides of the moon help that. But before we get to that, we're going to go into a few different things. First up, let's talk a little bit about you, what you do, what you're currently working on with your PhD candidacy. There we go. I can say that word. And then we're going to go into some other fun moon stuff.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Ron, for having me. It's always lovely to chat with you. So yes, my name is Raquel, and I am a PhD candidate at UCLA. I study the moon. I'm involved in a NASA mission called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, and I work on one of the instruments on board, which is called Diviner, and Diviner is looking at the temperature of the surface of the moon. And I've also worked on some of the cameras that are on board LRO, so we call those LROC. So those beautiful, amazing, high-resolution images that you see from the moon from space are probably from LRO and the cameras on board. It's a really cool mission. And yeah, I love talking about science and the moon. The moon is my favorite celestial object. So anytime Ron asks me to talk about the moon, I am all for it.
Well, I'm glad that you're able to come on and talk with us today. So let's talk a little bit about how your fascination with the moon happened, because as a planetary geologist, there's a lot to be fascinated with out there. So for you to choose the moon, there's probably got to be some really good reasons. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, the moon is something we see all the time. You know, I grew up looking at the moon, and for a while I always took it for granted. I always thought, we know everything about the moon, we know how it formed, people have been there, that it kind of lost the scientific mystique for me, but I was just always fascinated with it because it's so beautiful in the night sky or in the day sky. But then when I had the opportunity to join this NASA mission, LRO, I realized how little we still know about the moon. And that absolutely blew my mind. It's like, wow, there's still so much that we need to know, that we need to figure out about the moon. And that just sparked this scientific curiosity in me. So it went from just being this beautiful thing in the night sky to this object that we know, we still know very little about. And that's how my curiosity was sparked.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the mission that you get to work on with LRO. A lot of people may not know, one, about the missions that are still going on around the moon. The things that you can get to see, folks don't realize it. I'm sure that you get the question all the time, because I get the question all the time during live streams is, can you see where they landed on the moon on the Apollo missions? Those things happen quite often. And these amazing photos that we get from missions like this allow us to actually see those things. Like, you can go and you can check out the photos and stuff. So let's talk a little bit more in depth about this. What you get to do and what the mission is for LRO.
Yeah, so LRO was originally designed as a way to map the moon and find places and resources that when we send humans back to the moon, we know where to go, and we know the best places to go scientifically and also from a resource perspective. So that was the basis of the LRO mission, was to completely map the moon and understand as much as we can about it, so that when we return, we can make the best choices on where to go. But it turns out that it actually, it became much bigger than that. It became a scientific mission to figure out, how did the moon form? How did the moon evolve? Are there water? We call those volatile. So those are the light elements, light as in they're not that heavy. Elements, how many light elements are on the surface of the moon. And one of the things that we've discovered, so one of the coolest things that we've discovered with Diviner, the instrument that I work on, is that we've measured the coldest temperature ever in the solar system. Actually turns out to be in these craters at the poles of the moon. So on top, at the bottom, there's these craters that haven't seen sunlight for billions of years. And so it's really cold. Some of the coldest places in the solar system. And that's kind of crazy because you think, oh, well, Pluto is really far away. That must be colder. But no, inside these craters is actually colder than the surface of Pluto. And what's really exciting about that is that it's a place where trapped water ice can exist. So we think that there are massive amounts of water ice trapped within these permanently shadowed regions. That's what we call them, PSRs, permanently shadowed regions, because sunlight does not get inside of these craters. They're so deep, and the way that the moon doesn't really tilt very much, so sunlight just grazes the top of these craters and doesn't actually go inside.
So it hasn't been that long. You were actually on Star Talk talking to Neil deGrasse Tyson about the moon, and you were pretty stoked because he seemed to be more excited at the end of the conversation about the moon than he normally is. Because normally he's like, "It's the moon's cool," but you know that had to be a pretty cool experience for you. What was it? What was it like to be on the show and to be able to have that many, you know, voices? The voices that are on there are always incredible, and you were certainly of that caliber. What was it like to have that many people kind of listening in and being able to, you know, kind of maybe change his mind a little bit? His mind isn't easily changed.
No, it's not. So I was very nervous. I was very nervous to be on the podcast. I almost said no when the producer emailed me. She's like, "Hey, I'd love to have you on the show." And I didn't respond to her for, I think, a couple of days because I was like, "Oh, I can't do that. Like, I can't talk to Neil deGrasse because he's a legend, and he is somebody that we as science communicators look up to." And I was just, intimidated by getting to talk with him. But I was like, no. I'm going to try. I'm going to try to talk to him. And it turned out to be a lovely conversation. He had Chuck, the comedian, on, and he's really funny, and we had really, really great conversation about the moon. And I think I changed his mind a little bit. I told him at the beginning of the podcast that my goal was to get him to love the moon a little bit more, and he said that I did it. So that went for me.
Yep, absolutely. And Chuck's wonderful too. He's a great comedic host, and he's also a great kind of stand-in for the audience. And a lot of people don't really realize just how brilliant he is because he has a tendency to ask those questions that he thinks that folks want to ask, even without being able to read the questions, like we were lucky to do with a live stream like this. And he's a great opposite to Neil. They're always awesome on that. So before we kind of get into some of the things that we're going to talk about, you can see kind of the moon phases behind me. And I want to talk about that because a lot of people don't really understand exactly what causes the moon phases. It's kind of surprising how often we get that question here. So I want to discuss that a little bit with you and say, hey, what is it? What are moon phases? What causes that shadow to, race across the moon every month-ish, like 28.6 days or something like that?
Yeah. I wish I had, let me grab my moon globe. Maybe that will help. So this is my wonderful moon globe, and you can see my lighting. But essentially what is happening is, so this is the face we see. So because the moon is tidally locked, we only see this one side. We don't see the far side.
Clear distinction. It's the far side, not the dark side.
Yes, it's not the dark side because it's not dark. It gets sunlight just as much as the near side does.
Thanks, Pink Floyd. Thank you. I'm just kidding.
I actually get that question a lot. It's like, what? How can we see the dark side? I thought it was dark. It's like, well, let me tell you, it's actually, you can. But anyway, so the phases are, what we're seeing is the location of where the moon is compared to the sun. So, okay, let's say that you, the audience, you're on Earth and you're looking up at the moon. And if the sun is coming just from the side, so it's only lighting this side of the moon, you will only see this half of the moon. Since, sun this way, hold on, this is backwards. So you'll only see this half of the moon, but if the sun, so now you are the audience, you're on Earth, and you're looking up at the moon, and the sun is behind you on the other side of you, you'll see the full face of the moon. So you'll see a full moon. And the reason that we don't always have eclipses, so the Earth doesn't get in the way of the sun, is because that the moon's tilt compared to its orbit, it's slightly tilted. So Again, I wish I had. Let me get another ball here.
This is very interactive. If you didn't know, Raquel recently did a varsity tutors. I think it's still free, right? It's free for people. They can still go out and check it out. So I'll have to get that link so that way people can go and check that out. But she did a very interactive class talking about stuff just like this.
Yeah. It's just much easier because, you know, even for me, for the longest time, like I knew from reading, but I never really saw it in my mind until, like, you got to play with it. You got to either get on a like a planetarium software or play around with balls and lights to really start to get an intuitive feeling for what it is. So if you don't understand, like, I get it. It's hard. It's hard to think about planetary bodies, locations, and rotations. It's not easy. Okay, so if you have what I said was that the moon's tilt is well, the moon is slightly tilted. This orbit is tilted. So if the sun is, for example, like over here, let's say the sun is here, and let's pretend now this is the Earth and this is the moon. The moon's orbit is not perfectly in line. So what you'll see is you'll end up seeing the full moon. Now, if it's in its orbit where it's slightly aligned with the Earth, that's when we get eclipses, like lunar eclipses, when like the Earth will block the sun, or so yeah. So, but the phases is just how much light the moon is getting compared to where you're viewing it from the Earth. I wish I had better ways to describe this.
No, it's great. Well, and I think it's something that, you know, we just see it so often that sometimes people forget that, you know, the science and the things that are behind this that we've learned over so long. And one of the most interesting things that I love to discuss is the different possibilities of how our moon formed originally. And you know, I know that there's quite a few of them out there, so I figured we would talk about them. Which ones are the most likely as we know them now? And I mean, personally, mine is the whenever we thought that it was Theia that crashed into us and you know, coalesced. And so let's talk a little bit about that and the other ways that maybe we got our satellite, our main satellite anyway. Wasn't there like another little one there for a minute?
For a minute, yeah. But those orbits are not very stable. So yeah, we one moon's good. A question that I usually get is like, can you have a moon of a moon? And theoretically you can, but the orbit is not very moons. Yeah, but the orbits are not stable. And they will quickly either be ejected out of the system or crash into the moon or the planet. Anyways, so the formation theory. So the one that we think is the most likely was, just like you said, Ron, a Mars-sized planet, which we call Theia, crashed into the Earth during the Earth's early period and threw up a bunch of rocks and material out into space, and that rock and gas coalesced and formed our moon. And that's what we think happened. And it answers a lot of questions like, you know, the moon is very similar compositionally to the Earth. So that was like a thing that we learned. So when we brought rocks back from the Apollo missions, we realized that, well, wait a minute, the moon is actually very similar. And that's really weird because, you know, you look at all the different planets and they're all very different. So another theory was that it was a captured object. So the Earth captured something that was coming by and it became our moon. But that doesn't really explain how or why the moon is so similar to the Earth. Because, like I said, all the other planets, everything is so different. So why would just a random object in space be so similar to the Earth? So that's one of the reasons why we think that the moon was created from an object that impacted into the Earth, mixed in with what was the Earth originally, and some of that stuff got thrown up into space and coalesced and formed our moon, and that explains a lot of the things that we see, but it doesn't explain everything. So that's the best theory we have right now, but there are still some unanswered questions, and one of those questions are, so the moon is very similar compositionally to the Earth, but it's got a lot less volatile. So those lighter elements. And we think we kind of know why that is. You know, if you have like molten material, the lighter elements get to escape and they escaped out into space, but we're still not sure that that's the mechanism that happened.
It really is truly fascinating. And so behind me, I have the Earth up behind. Well, let me switch this way. That's the Earth behind me. There we go. Again, everything's
it's so hard to do that.
So you got to get used to it. Yeah, it really is, because I'm always like, wait a minute, hold on, it's over there. So behind me on our SOS is the Earth. And for those folks that don't know, if you've never been to the Discovery Center, please come and visit us. We actually have our folks, our volunteers, and sometimes even our space education specialists will come in and do presentations on this. And they're really amazing. We take you through tours of the solar system. We actually had our volunteer in here doing one with a pretty decent sized room, socially distanced, of course, and we all have our masks. Mine's here. So we have a really safe environment, and more people are coming back in and seeing us. So we do love that. But now that I got our plug in, because we want you to come and say hi to us, let's talk a little bit about how the moon affects us. And specifically, let's talk about the tides. So one of the reasons we wanted to reach out to talk to you today was everybody knows what's been going on in the Suez Canal, and that the Ever Given got stuck. And because of the, and by the way, it's stuck again. Yeah, I just found that out yesterday. Went to go find some information and found out it was stuck again.
I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah, apparently it's stuck again. Yeah, so they're working that out. They're working it out. But it was because of an effect that the moon has on our planet and on our waters. It was able to be moved, and that's the tides. So let's talk a little bit about the tides and how the moon is affected by that. And we can even go back. So whenever the moon first formed, it was actually much closer, and so the tides were much higher. So it's kind of crazy to think about that, how it does affect us. Not in like the astrology kind of way, but how it can certainly affect our waters and oceans and lakes and so on. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, my favorite thing to talk about when I will address the tides, but something that a lot of people don't know is that the moon actually affects the wobble of the Earth. So the Earth does not wobble very much in its orbit because it has a large moon to stabilize it. Mars's orbit is we call it obliquity, is always tilting back and forth, and that drastically changes the climate and the weather on Mars. So it gets really cold. And then like another part will get really cold, and then another part of the planet will be really cold. And we don't get that here on Earth because we have a large moon that stabilizes our orbit. So we have to thank our moon for our stable seasons and our stable climate. Yes. So then for tides, so the gravitational pull of the moon and also the sun. So the sun also has an impact on the tides of the Earth. So it pulls on the ocean, and because the ocean is easier to deform than the crust, but the crust also deforms. So the rocks on Earth actually deform a little bit. Also, there are tides, rock tides, but because rocks are stronger, you don't see that as much. But the same thing happens on water, because liquid is just easier to deform, and so that's what the tides are. It's water being pulled by the moon and the sun.
And so we also talk about the fact that the moon is tidally locked. That's why we only ever see that one side of it. What does it mean to be tidally locked? Because you hear that and you're like, oh, tides, there's something there. There's something at play with that.
Yeah, so tidal locking occurs, it is because of tides, and what happens is that one side of another body, so in our case our moon, always faces the parent body, so the Earth, and that happens. It is because of tides, and just as the moon deforms the Earth, so pulls on the oceans, the Earth, of course, also pulls on the moon a lot gravitationally, and so it stretches it a little bit, right? So it instead of being a perfectly sphere, it kind of becomes this oblate shape. So as it's rotating, these elongated areas go, they're going around, and so the Earth is always constantly pulling, tugging at that front piece. And so as the moon is rotating, the Earth tries to pull back on that edge, on that elongated edge. And over time, it slows it down enough that the rotation, the period that the moon rotates matches the rotation of it around the Earth. So it's the Earth tugging at the moon ever so slightly over millions of years that makes it so the moon. So a lot of people think that the moon doesn't rotate. The moon does rotate, but it just so happens that it rotates at the same rate that it spins around the Earth.
Fantastic. And so you were talking a little bit earlier about, LRO, and it's looking for certain places where whenever we go back to the moon, they will be some of the most interesting spots. That's how we're going to pick these spots. And so we're all excited about it. Sometime in the 2020s, sometimes in this current decade, we're going back to the moon. Yeah, I know. Really, really stoked for that. First woman, next man on the moon. And eventually it will just be people going to the moon, which is exciting just to have all that's going on right now. What exactly are we looking for that's more interesting now, that say what we didn't know 50 years ago when we were going to the moon? What's creating a target now?
Well, it depends if you're looking at, just purely scientific targets or places where you can set up, for example, a base, a place to a more permanent thing. There's lots of really cool scientific places to go to, but if we are trying to make a permanent presence on the moon, we have to think about resources. Like, what are the types of things that we need, that humans need? And one of those things is water. And we know that there are these craters, these permanently shadowed regions inside these craters that have large amounts of water ice. So that is an interesting place for us to go, because maybe we can harvest some of that water somehow, either both for human consumption, but also to make fuel, because you can make fuel from water. So that's a place that is really interesting. Another place that we're looking at is, we call these pits, these lava pits. So there are lava tubes underneath the lava oceans on the moon. And sometimes what happens, there's a meteorite that comes in and it hits the surface and it punches through some of those lava caves, those lava tubes, and it forms these caves, these pits. So those are really great places, because some of my colleagues do thermal modeling in them, and from his work, he's shown that the temperature in there is really reasonable. So a lunar day is 2 weeks long, and a lunar night is 2 weeks long, and so inside the lunar cave, there is not that big temperature variation. So it's a nice temperature-wise environment for astronauts to live, and to also to be protected from radiation and to be protected from micrometeorite impacts. So those are two really interesting places to go to from a base perspective, like a permanent base perspective. But there's all kinds of really scientifically interesting places. There's this place, Marius Hills, where there's all these little cinder cones. So we think that there was some volcanic activity that was kind of recent in geologic terms, which is still millions, maybe billions of years. But it's interesting because maybe we can understand, by looking and sampling those places, we can see what was inside the, how hot it was inside the mantle when these things erupted. Because by looking at the crystals, you can learn the temperatures, because certain crystals only form at certain temperatures. So you learn a lot by looking at the rocks. You learn about the environment that they were formed, what kind of volatiles were in there, what were the chemical elements, the chemical composition. So it just depends on if you want to do purely science or if you want to do a more human exploration type work.
It's really a shame you don't like talking about the moon. I mean, it's obvious, you just look bored, never smiling at all. So you may have just kind of answered this with some of the things that you've been saying, well, actually throughout the entire interview, but what's the most interesting fact about the moon that maybe people don't know that you love telling people about and it surprises them?
Oh, okay. There's like so many, but one that people don't know. Well, we still don't know, but we think this happened. That the moon used to be completely molten. So after it formed, uh, there was so much energy from all the impacts, all the rocks, the whole thing coming together. It heated up the moon so much that the whole thing melted, and so we call that it was covered in a magma ocean. So imagine if we had been alive then and looking up at the night sky and just this glowing orb of magma, of lava out in space, which is kind
Liquid
of
hot
crazy.
magma. Sorry, I can't not do that when I hear that term.
Right. But yeah, and eventually, you know, that cooled, and that's so when you look at the far side of the moon, it looks very different than the near side. So we think that this is like the original crust. So after the magma ocean solidified, this is what you got. And then later on in the moon's history, these darker regions, these are actually lava plains. So lava erupted later on in the moon's history and formed all of these dark regions, like all of this. These are ancient lava plains that erupted later on in the moon's history. And we're not quite sure why they erupted. I think, you know, theories have been like, well, it was an impact that caused it, but we're not sure. It just looks like the lava settled in the lowest region. So these are ancient basins. So these are ancient impact regions, but that it wasn't the impact that caused the lava. It was later on the lava came out of the moon and settled in these lower regions on the moon. So there's some cool facts, lava and a magma ocean, which is so cool.
The magma ocean sounds pretty fascinating. We've actually got a really great question from Mac Malkawi. He asks, does that tugging wobble cause moonquakes? And I don't know that I've ever asked that question before. Are there moonquakes? So we're searching on Mars to see if Mars has Marsquakes with InSight, and it looks like, yeah, it does. So what about the moon?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mac. Yeah, so so when the astronauts went to the moon, they had seismometers. They brought seismometers with them, and they detected moonquakes. And yes, we do think that it's the Earth tugging at the moon. But the other thing that it could also be is, so the moon is also shrinking. It's another really cool fact, because the moon is cooling. The moon is still cooling, and as it cools, it shrinks a little bit. And so that could be another source of these moonquakes. It's the moon shrinking.
Fascinating stuff. So, Raquel, is there anything else that you're up to right now? Any upcoming things? I know you're always working on new stuff, or doing a virtual event or in-person events. We're going to finally be able to do those again here before long. Hopefully, like maybe in like the summer, fall, everybody gets vaccinated and we can be around each other a little bit more. So, anything in particular you have that's coming up? Is there anything that you would like to share with the folks at home, and then also where they can find you, kind of on social media?
Yes, you can find me. I'm not very good at being all over social media, so I just focus on one, which is Instagram, and it's a mishmash of my PhD and space things and birds, because I like looking at birds, and my kids sometimes as well. But yeah, so follow me on there for all kinds of good stuff. And what am I up to? I want to go to the moon. There's this contest to go to the moon.
Yeah, Dear Moon, awesome.
And I passed to the next round, I guess. And so we'll see. I'll keep my fingers crossed. I'm not keeping my hopes up, but it's kind of amazing and wild to me that we live in a time when I can enter a contest to go to the moon. What a time to be alive, Ron.
There are so many things that are going on right now. A mutual friend of ours just won the seat on the Inspiration 4 flight. So Dr. Cyan Proctor is going to be, heading up with that group a little bit later this year. There's Dear Moon, and I think you can even still enter it you can still enter Dear Moon, right? Can people still do it, or is it only? Are the selections now continuing? Because
I think the selections are still continuing. I don't know. Maybe it'll. As far as I know, they're narrowing down their the applicant pool.
Well, now I didn't get in on that one. I've been so busy that I forgot to do one. But there's a lot of really great people. Well, I mean,
there'll be more. There'll be more. This is just the beginning.
This is becoming a thing. Yeah, and that's what I'm excited about. I can't wait. I can't wait to go to space. I can't wait to see all of. Really, it's going to be more and more of the people in our community, and that means that it can even be you listening at home. It is no longer just going to be just for It's wonderful that we have the astronauts that we have, but we're going to be able to represent more and more of humanity as more of these opportunities open up. And now we all just got to see the new Virgin Galactic Spaceship 3 with its super cool chrome look. It's just becoming so cool. a bigger and bigger thing. And a little shout out from Kavi Rose saying, "Woohoo, go Cyan, go!" We're all excited. The community is all behind you, and we can't wait to see. I'll have to talk to Cyan. We'll have to do a follow-up interview with her and talk about all the cool stuff she's been up to. She's been busy. So really, thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us about the moon and kind of giving us a little bit of an insight to one of the things that you obviously love so much. Keep doing all the amazing work that you're doing. And if there's anybody that has any questions, please let us know, and we can get them to Raquel and see if we can get you some answers if you weren't able to ask live today. So Raquel, anything else before we wrap up?
No, that's it. Thank you, Ron, again so much. I always have such a great time talking to you. So thank you.
Same, Raquel. And everybody, please go check out our websites. In particular, go to discoverspace.org and you can find out all the virtual things that we're doing. You can even do a virtual Discover the Universe, which is what we call our field trips, where, again, eventually I'm going to get that right. You can have a really cool thing where we go through the year. So right now, all I'm showing you is the Earth, but we can really kind of go everywhere. So if you like other planets, like say, let's go to, hold on a second, here's Saturn. Notice the rings are missing because we can't do that. Okay, that one's a little bit too bright. Let's do something with darker colors. Nope, that was even brighter. Let's go to Mars. Normally, I have the ability to control a camera so we can kind of mess with the lighting a little bit. There you go. Mars stands out a little bit more because it's a darker color. But we're able to kind of take you on these trips through the solar system, and we do all kinds of fun stuff. So please come and visit us and check out our websites for more. We're always up to fun stuff. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on this special edition of Space4U Live. And thank you once again to our guest, Raquel Nuno, the space geologist. Bye, everybody.